welcome again to Sid Caudle. Well, Sid's been watching the Labour Party conference in Liverpool this morning. I've just taken in, well, something of this afternoon, Bridget Phillipson, education. But I tell you what, I ain't bothered. I could write the script for them all. I thought they'd had an injection, actually, Sid, to cure them of the phrase 14 years of Tory rule. But it still goes on. They never say anything else. Well, hang on, what about 14 months of Labour rule? Has it got better? No.
Well, exactly. You see, because what you'd like to think was that, oh, we've, if it were true, which I'm not sure it is, that, they inherited a terrible situation and, they've got an enormous number of major problems to cope with. You like to think that they were at least putting in policies in place to turn things round. But actually, I think it's the other way round. I think they actually inherited quite a good situation overall, and they've made things much worse. I think that's the reality of it. Now, if I can just talk very briefly about Rachel Reeves, whose speech I've been listening to. You see, the first half of her speech, she was talking about the Conservative Party, which is what we're saying. This terrible inheritance we had from the Tories, and she came up with this very spurious statistic that if growth in the UK had matched growth in the United States over the last 40 years, then we'd be 140 billion better off, which frankly is nonsense because I mean, there's other countries like France and Italy that have actually had lower growth than us. I mean, just comparing us with the United States is really meaningless, frankly. And the other thing, of course, is that in that time, the United States has borrowed phenomenal amounts of money. They've even got up to 120% now, their debt GDP ratio. And if you borrow enormous amounts of money, you can get growth, but it's all short-term growth. It's not long-term because long-term it's unsustainable. And you see, in comparing it with what the Conservatives did, you see, you have to remember that in 2010, the Conservatives inherited a situation where the deficit was enormous, 140 billion, and that was completely unsustainable, and they had to bring it down. And they were effectively brought it down. They actually brought it down to 39 billion by 2019. Now, if you're bringing the deficit down by that much, then there's bound to be a sacrifice of growth, I'm afraid. That's inevitable, but they still average growth of 2% in that period per year. Labour's growth over the last 12 months has been 1.2%, which incidentally has been significantly less than the G7 and the OECD. So it's significantly less than the average for other countries that what we've actually achieved. So what they're achieving is significantly less than the Conservatives were achieving, even though they're complaining like crazy about the Conservatives' record. And in that time, the deficit has gone up from 54 billion, which they inherited, to 158 billion now. Enormous rise. So what should happen if you're injecting that sort of money into the economy, and an extra 100 billion that you're borrowing, growth should be phenomenal, frankly. The fact that growth is so bad shows that they've just got it hopelessly wrong. The reality, by the way, of what they ought to be doing is cutting spending, cutting quangos, as we've said before, which they could actually save 188 billion, using that money to increase capital spending and cut taxes. You see, what the Labour Party have done is substantially increase spending, revenue spending, cut capital spending, and increase taxes. And those policies are policies for stagnation, recession, call it what you like, increased debt. I mean, they're exactly the wrong policies for the nation, for the economy.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I've got something here that will solve Rachel's problems. Had a stroke, and the figures match perfectly. And it's HMRC, our tax office. And they're not answering the phone, Sid. working from home, various reasons, but we get used to this, trying to phone government departments. They don't answer. Um, well, it's from good, honest, working people. Listen to that, socialists, please. Working people. We're all working people, not just the ones you designate. Well, these working people are mainly self employed small businesses, and they are saying, I need help. I owe you tax. Can you tell me what I should do? And there's thousands of them, and they can't get through. Now, if they could get through, Sid, we have worked it out. The government could collect £42 billion this last year. And that happens to be the exact figure of Rachel's hole at the moment. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Let's get to the civil servants. That's where a lot of problems stem from. Why aren't these people accountable? Why does nobody do anything? Because it's a monopoly, of course.
Yeah, but you see, the fact that these numbers of people are contacting HMRC, and wanting help shows that we have developed major problems within the economy, which have really come from increasing national insurance, increasing employers' national insurance, and also by other things they've done, like putting VAT on school fees, has not helped a lot of people. Increasing stamp duty has caused problems for some people wanting them to go abroad. Plus, also the concerns which they've got about other changes which they might be making, like getting rid of the tax-free lump sum on pensions and so on and so forth. All of a sudden, Britain becomes an unattractive place for people to continue to live in and do business. And that's bound to affect the revenue which the country gets. I mean, if you're chasing the richest people abroad, the richest 1% pay one third of all tax. So if you're chasing a lot of people from the richest 1% abroad, then obviously there's going to be a big reduction in your tax receipts, even though there might be relatively few people. So, this is we've absolutely got things going in the wrong direction, I'm afraid. And whatever they say, the only way to solve the problems is to drastically change policy.
Well, that's not going to happen. I can't see anything happening. He's going to hang on. Reminds me of the manager of Manchester United. We'll come back to that later. Boris and Nigel, it was only a few weeks ago. There was a bit of a love in there, allegedly. Oh, get Boris, he'll bring in so many Tory disenchanted MPs. But I tell you what, Nigel said no then, and he's been proved right. In fact, Nigel's turned on him and said all the immigration in recent years, Boris, it comes from you. This over migration of people coming into our country. He called it the Boris wave. And if you look at the stats, it's pretty hard to avoid them. There's no chance of him going to reform, is there?
Well, let's just focus on this Boris wave for a minute. You see, we do have to bear in mind that some of the people that came in during Boris Johnson's tenure were people from Hong Kong that were coming in large numbers. Nigel Farage is saying they should never have been allowed in, but reality is they were facing severe oppression from China, and there were people that did genuinely look to the UK to help them out because the UK had helped them out before, and I think they were right to be let in. Then we also had large numbers of people coming from Ukraine when the war started in Ukraine, and that was part of the Boris wave. But again, those people were desperate. They weren't people just coming over illegally in small boats. They were people that we opened the doors to because they were in an extremely dangerous situation and needed help. Now, so if you just look at the raw figures, I think that's very unfair. I think you've got to look at the overall situation. What Boris Johnson did do, rightly or wrongly, was say that any students that had come from overseas to study in the UK could have 2 years to find a job before they had to go back. That was a new rule by Boris Johnson. And I sympathise with it, frankly, because the reality is that we haven't paid for these people's education. They have got some training in some of the best universities in the world, you'd like to think, that are in the UK. And if these people are now highly qualified engineers, scientists, whatever, and they're able to work in the UK and get a good job in the UK, then they will be a tremendous asset to our economy. Now, if you compare that with people coming over in the small boats, which by and large are people that are uneducated, unable to work, and not wanting to work, just wanting to sit around and do nothing and welcome our hospitality. You see, actually allowing students who are now well qualified a couple of years to find work, it might put up the immigration figures, but I think on the whole, that policy was not necessarily bad for the country. So I think you've got to look behind the raw statistics. I think if you just look at the raw statistics and nothing else, I think that's unfair, in my opinion.
Got to look at the cultural problems as well, Sid. It's all right saying, oh, we need their brains, but if you look at the pie chart I've been sent last week about, oh, we'd be in a right mess without the NHS, without the doctors, represents less than 2% of that pie chart. And it's just not the truth.
Well, there is obviously a strong argument for saying that people that have come here on a student visa or on a work visa shouldn't be allowed to have free access to the National Health Service or their children have free access to education. And I'm sorry, but you're welcome to come here, you're welcome to study here, you're welcome to look for a job. But if you need to use the NHS, then you'll have to pay for it. I think that's a perfectly valid argument. I don't see anything wrong with that whatsoever. But it's not, we can't only just look at numbers. We've also got to look at who these people are. And the vast majority of people coming over here illegally in small boats are Muslims. They're not fleeing persecution. They're not coming from Ukraine or Hong Kong or any country. I mean, a lot of them have come from countries like Albania. Albania aren't a dangerous country to live in. I mean, they're not now. They were years back when they were under communism, but they're not now. And people aren't fleeing Albania. But you see, it's quite interesting. It's the same thing for America. America had floods of people pouring over the Mexico border, and those people weren't fleeing persecution either. They wanted to get a better life in America for one reason or another. And you see, it's interesting that Trump has actually said, I mean, I don't know whether this is correct or not, but this is what he said. And he said the figure he's been given for the last 4 months, the immigration into the United States is now zero. That's what he said. Well, of course, under Biden, it was 5 million that came in through the Mexico border. Massive numbers. But what were these people doing? I mean, if they're just trying to better themselves, they just want to take advantage of the hospitality the country offers. I'm sorry, but that's not something. I mean, I'm all in favour of legal immigration for those people who are coming here to study, coming here to work. There's nothing wrong with it, frankly. There's everything wrong with illegal immigration, with people that basically just cross the border and find their way here and don't intend to work and don't intend to contribute to the country. I mean, that should be stopped. And it can be stopped and should be stopped by the Royal Navy. It's actually much easier to stop people coming in if they've got to cross the sea than it is to stop people coming across a land border. And Trump has successfully stopped people coming across a land border. So if he can do that, we can stop people coming across a sea, frankly.
Yes, that's a good comparison. Let me tell you another good comparison. Whilst we were in the US, there's been a Hyundai factory there, and somehow they've managed to get South Koreans, everybody from the originating country, to work. It's a great majority of their workforce, indeed. And Trump is not happy, but he's done something about it. Literally, he said, we don't want our own workers prejudicing. They should have these jobs. And within a fortnight, an airplane was on its way from South Korea to take them back. Now, that's the strong person that we need in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I mean he's done brilliantly. And interestingly enough, I think the majority of people in America know that he's done brilliantly. And by the way, just one final thing while we're talking about this, I think that Nigel Farage's statement that he's going to revoke indefinite leave to remain in retrospect for people that have been granted indefinite leave to remain in the UK, that their situation will be reassessed and they may well be deported, is absolutely wrong. It's totally wrong. I mean, I've got no problem with saying we're going to tighten criteria and we're going to make it harder for people to get indefinite leave to remain. But to say that we're going to make judgment in retrospect and people that have been given some security will say we'll have the security taken away from you, that is totally, totally unfair and messing around with people's lives and is wrong, utterly wrong.
You say that, Sid, but think of the illegal migrants that come over the channel and deliberately lie, deliberately throw their passports in the water. I would suspect most of the people that you're talking about came across the Mexican border and lied their way in as, okay, seeking to get more money, not better themselves. All they want is more money and an easier lifestyle. So why shouldn't Trump say, well, hang on, prove your legitimacy or we will throw you out? You've come in here lying, taking advantage of the whole of the US potentially. Prove your capabilities. All right, it's an individual judgment that has to be made. Tis possible.
Well, if Nigel Farage was saying anyone that's come here illegally, we will reassess, even though they may have been granted definite leave to remain, then I would have some sympathy. But literally saying we're going to review everyone that's been given indefinite leave to remain and cancel it and start again is wrong, very wrong. Obviously, people that have come here illegally are in a different category from people who've come here legally and maybe overstayed or whatever. They didn't go back and stayed in this country. In some cases, it can literally be because they met somebody. It's like I want to stay in this country. I've met my husband or I've met my wife, and yeah, I don't want to go back to the previous country because I feel happy here and I want to stay here. There's nothing wrong with that happening if it happens, and if they've got a job. And obviously it's no good if they're just on unemployment pay and just expecting to be in unemployment pay. But if they've got a job and they've got a good job and they're well qualified, then they'll be an asset to the country, frankly. And we have to draw a distinction between people coming here illegally and people coming here legally, I'm afraid.
Well, there's 600,000 of them out of work in the United Kingdom. They've gone through university, thanks to Mr. Tony Blair. They should never have been there in the first place. And they've got no qualifications except in nail cutting and other interesting achievements. And they're now sat at home collecting the dole. But there is a chink in the armour here. Even some Labour Party enthusiasts are saying that's wrong. We've got to cut the benefits. Dead right.
Well, I've got no problem with saying if people come here as an overseas student and overstay, and they under no circumstances will they be entitled to benefits. I've got no problem with saying that.
Well,
You know,
these are the indigenous, Sid. These are British folk coming out of
Okay,
New
well,
Jersey.
if you're talking about British folk, they go to university and then after university can't get a job, then they are entitled to unemployment pay, I'm afraid. And it's very difficult, very hard to distinguish between somebody who isn't interested in working and somebody who wants to work but can't get a job. And by the way, while we're talking like this, I mean, what's actually happened under the Labour Party is unemployment's gone up by 10%. So even though they've been creating all these 28 new quangos and spending billions extra money in the state sector, because they've increased national insurance and because they've hit business so badly, despite all the extra jobs they've created in the public sector, the net situation is a loss of jobs in the country.
Lots of the people you've mentioned this that are coming over legally and illegally are Muslims. It wasn't so long, a Conservative Party said, a member of the Conservative Party, that it's an invasion. It is. People realise it is. Now, what's an Islamic invasion look like? Well, it can look like many things over the centuries. It has been very physical. Now it's done by stealth, people are saying. And here we are. Muslim Council of Britain are pushing all sorts of things on us, especially Sharia law. And the government once again have bowed to their insistence. And if you're at a university, you are under some pressure when you come and mention student loans, because interest is payable on student loans. Not a lot, but some. So the Sharia Council, the Muslim Council, are wanting to get here more Sharia law. So they've developed, the government, a special scheme that you and I have known about for years, whereby no interest is paid. Well, it's a sidestep, isn't it? Because you just take a bond out, as it were, and pay more for your bond, which represents the interest over those 3 years, and then you pay it back. Technically, there's no interest. Of course, there's interest. It's a sham.
Yeah,
That's
no,
the first point. The second sham is we should have nothing to do with Sharia law, for goodness sake.
this is interesting. I mean, today, Sadiq Khan has been saying, oh, we don't have any Sharia courts in the UK. What Trump is saying is nonsense. It's true, we don't have any anything we call Sharia courts in the UK, but we call them Sharia councils. And the Sharia councils are actually the same thing as Sharia courts. And what you're saying about Islamic finance is basically correct, you see, because what they do is you say, well, you can't take a mortgage because a mortgage involves paying interest and you can't pay interest. So under Islamic finance, what you do is pay a fee. So you pay a fee every month for your for what you're borrowing, and the fee is the equivalent of the interest. So it's just language. That's all it is. It's just another way of lending money. One way is you lend money and you pay a fee for it. The other way you lend money and you pay interest for it. It's but the figures are the same. So it's just the whole thing is just platitudes, frankly. But the real seriously bad thing about Sharia councils is twofold. One is the way they treat converts, because under Sharia law, anyone who leaves their Muslim religion must be put to death. Well, in the UK, they're not going to be put to death, but they are going to be ostracized, treated extremely badly, and maybe even beaten up, thrown out houses, whatever, all this sort of thing will happen. And the other thing is the way they treat women, because of course men can easily get a divorce. And in fact, a man in the Quran is entitled to 4 wives, and you can have what's called a missia marriage. So you can be married to a woman, and then you can meet somebody who may be a prostitute, get married to them for the night, and then divorce them in the morning. That's permissible under Islamic law. And a Muslim wife who says, "Oh, my husband's been unfaithful. He's been having sex with all these other women." Hey, you go to the Sharia Council, and the Sharia Council will say, "Well, I'm sorry, but that's perfectly acceptable. You just have to accept that that's what your husband wants. You're obviously not giving him as much as he wants. You should go home and try and be a better wife and give him a bit more, and then maybe he wouldn't be looking for other women. That's what the Sharia Council will say. And if there's violence, if a Muslim man is beating up his wife, then that's allowed under Islam. Under 434, if your wife is disobedient, you can admonish her, throw her out of the bed, and beat her. So a Muslim wife who says my husband's beating me, she'll be told to go back and say, well, you must obey your husband and do what your husband says. And if you do that, then I'm sure that he'll stop beating you. Um, Basically, a woman cannot get divorce under Sharia law. A man can get divorced very easily. All he's got to say to his wife 3 times is talaq, talaq, talaq. I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. And he's divorced under Sharia law. So it's very unfair treatment of women compared to men, and that's a major problem, frankly, in British society. If these councils exist and operate, and where Sharia law does operate, then the women are oppressed. I mean, Afghanistan is the most obvious example where they're actually, in many cases, kept indoors. Because, by the way, in the Quran it says that the wives of the prophets stayed indoors. So, in the most extreme version of Islam, women are told they have to stay indoors, and I mean, there's Sharia law for you.
Well, yes, but when the Muslim Council of Great Britain comes along and say we want equality for our students, that they're on the same basis, this is the way to do it. Well, that's fine, but are you prepared to give your women equality the way they're treated, as you've mentioned? And the other thing that's not generally understood is the inheritance tax. She gets practically half what a man would get. This
Yeah,
is Sharia law.
yeah,
It's hypocrisy.
yeah. That's another disadvantage of Sharia law. Yeah, yeah. A woman gets half what a man gets. Um, yeah, I mean, frankly, the whole thing is unacceptable. But it's natural for Muslims to argue their corner and argue for what they want. But the idea that we don't have Sharia courts in the UK, I'm afraid, the Sharia councils that we have are the same thing and they are operating. And Sadiq Khan can say as much as he likes, oh, it's not true, we don't have Sharia courts. He's just basically trying to pull the wool over people's eyes.
And they're very skilled at doing it. And we're very skilled at keep mentioning HS2. That's come up again. I'm not surprised. And maybe it sums up our country. How not to run, I don't know. They couldn't organize a riot. We've got something that never should have been started in the form it was starting. It was a vanity project right from the beginning and has suffered the demise. The biggest thing was to open an avenue between the north and the south. By going to Birmingham, it cuts off minutes of the journey. That's no good at all. But that part they're going ahead, even though they got the most expensive part of it in that lot, getting the last 3 miles to Euston Station, of course. Mega. Now, there are 3,000 green organisations that have been opposing HS2 from the beginning. 3,000. No wonder it's not getting anywhere, Sid. You've got this wretched bat tunnel that, if it wasn't there, saves £2 billion. But I'll tell you the main problem. Well, there are two, actually. There are various ministers over the years that have been put in charge, and it's a poisoned cup. They don't want it because they're afraid it'll affect their career, because they know it's bound to fail in its present state. But it goes right back to the beginning. If it wasn't a vanity project, they'd have top sliced 20 mile an hour instead of 200, 180, whatever's the latest miles an hour to get this train going. It's going to be the fastest, the best in Europe. Doesn't meet the Japanese speeds, but as long as it's the best in Europe. Now, if they'd have planned this around cutting 20 mile an hour, that's all, whereby you don't need a lot of the tunnels. You don't need the curves, which slows everything down. And it's been corroborated now that it would cost half as much of the 100 and odd million that it would cost if they'd have gone ahead with the whole project. In other words, it would have been affordable. But because non-businessmen are making decisions instead of Whitehall and instead of short-termism government, we've finished up with a disaster that was bound to happen.
Well, yes, there's two things. The first, we were opposed to the HS2 contract concept in the beginning. So when they first mooted it, we said no, there's not a great advantage in chopping 15 or 20 minutes off the time it takes to get to Birmingham or the time it takes to get to Manchester or Leeds. The amount of new business that's going to be created through this project is frankly minimal, which is why we've said a far better project would be having a new airport in the Thames estuary. I mean, that will create a phenomenal amount of new business for the country. And when you're going to invest this sort of money, you want business to come through it. Obviously, while it's being constructed, you create jobs in construction, but after it's finished, you want new jobs as a result, or new commerce as a result of the project, which is now complete. I mean, that's the essential part. If you're going to spend these sort of amounts of money, there's got to be big rewards at the end of the after you've spent the money. Given the fact, and that's the first point. The second point is given the fact that it's now underway. See, the major problem that we face in this country is not the amount we're spending on HS2. The major problem is the amount we're spending on quangos, which I've been into before, but I'll say again, in 2010, we spent 90 billion on quangos, which in real terms now is 165 billion. We're actually spending now, the latest figure is 353 billion. So the spending's gone up 188 billion. Now, if we go back to what we were spending in 2010, that's all we're saying. We're not saying get rid of all the quangos, we don't want them. We don't want any red tape. We're saying, yeah, okay, we do need some of these governing bodies, but they've all got bloated out of all proportion. So we're going to save 188 billion from cutting back there. And you can easily, that's going to be per year, by the way. I mean, we're talking about 100 billion to to complete HS2, but that 100 billion is going to be over probably 10 years or so. So we're only talking about 10 billion a year. I'm talking about saving 188 billion per year. So, the scale is phenomenal, and capital spending creates jobs. Now, what we've got to do, if we were in power, given the fact that HS2 is now underway, is extend it to a new airport in the Thames estuary and possibly even extend it right through to the Channel Tunnel. So we'll have a fast connection between the new airport in the Thames estuary and the north of England, and to Birmingham and to Manchester and to Leeds. And we'll have a fast connection to the Channel Tunnel, and we'll have new roads built to the new airport, and so on and so forth. It'll cost, we could build the new airport for about 40 billion, but obviously all the roads and railways that have to be linked to it would cost a lot more than that. But if you're saving 188 billion per year, you can easily afford it. And if we do the right capital spending, the right capital spending is what the country needs to create wealth, as well as cutting taxes, which would also cut taxes from the 188 billion that we would save, plus the other money we'd save from getting rid of social requirements of government contracts, which would save about 50 billion, and introducing a turnover tax, which would bring in over 40 billion. With all those figures together, you're talking about 240 billion. And we're talking about something like a third of all government spending that we would save. If we channel that to capital spending and to cutting taxes, then, that's what will bring growth in the economy. It will transform the economy.
I wonder, Sid, with respect,
Hmm.
whether one of the few things I approve of what this particular government have been up to has suddenly appeared. Gatwick. Now, Gatwick is pretty close to London, not bad communications, and it's overloaded. Well, out of the bag, the rabbits come. There we are, you can have a second runway. Now, it's not as simple as that. It's already got a second runway that can only be used because it's too close to the first runway as a safety measure if the first runway, the principal runway, is closed. But it's a perfectly healthy runway. And the government have approved suddenly a second real runway for Gatwick. It's just going to be separated by about 18 metres. So there'll be three runways, one as an emergency, runway one that exists, and the new runway two. And they reckon in 3 years it'd be done. Now, phenomenal compared with what's going to happen at Heathrow, if it ever does. And it proves to me what governments can do if it comes to the, hey lads, hey, let's sort this out. And what do I mean? Well, you've got a real problem with infrastructure and getting people to the airport. It's adequate at the moment, just. But in the real world, maybe it won't be adequate. And that's stymied the project for years. But suddenly the government's come up with an idea. Oh, well, we'll make you, airport authority, responsible for the public transport to go to Gatwick Airport itself. So we won't be controlling it, saying that there must be so many trains and etc., which has always been the major blocker. And suddenly it's done. Suddenly, if you're within the curtilage of the airport, you can have 3 triple glazing. Suddenly, you can also say, oh, my house is worth 2/3 what it is, and you'll get compensation, unless you want to move, of course. The same problem exists if it's already been announced, but that's the law that's going to come through. Now, at the moment, there's a plane every 55 seconds to Gatwick. Wow, that's perhaps it's oversaturated. The new runway will produce over 100,000 extra flights a year. So it looks as though it may be a half decent scheme.
Okay, right. There's two problems here. The first problem, really, you've alluded to, and that is that both Gatwick and Heathrow are basically in residential areas. Because they're in residential areas, it basically means that you can't fly at night because it causes too much noise. So all the flights have to be stopped at night. If we had a new airport in the Thames Estuary, then all the flights could fly at night as well as during the day because they wouldn't be flying over residential areas. So there wouldn't be any problem with that regard. And in order to build new runways, you've got to demolish villages, you've got to take a whole load of farmland and goodness knows what else in order to build the runways now and the roads up to them. So they're talking about an extra 10 billion for Gatwick, which is far, far less than I'm talking about, obviously, to create a new airport. Now, the other problem is that Heathrow is a hub airport, which basically means that roughly 50% of the people that fly into Heathrow are flying into London. The other 50% are flying on somewhere else. So, for instance, if you're coming from New York to Copenhagen, you don't get a flight to Copenhagen, you get a flight to Heathrow, and you get a flight from Heathrow to Copenhagen. people aren't going to fly into Heathrow and then get a taxi or a train to Gatwick and then fly from Gatwick to Copenhagen. That's just not going to happen. So, you see, Gatwick is basically a holiday airport. I mean, it's basically people go to Gatwick to go on holiday, whenever British people go on holiday. So it's not a hub airport. People coming into Gatwick aren't coming into Gatwick to fly on somewhere else, by and large. So what we need in London is a substantial new hub airport. And you see, whatever they build at Gatwick isn't going to take the pressure off Heathrow for the reason I've just described. It'll mean maybe more people can go on holiday more easily, and if the demand is there for Gatwick, great, increase the size of Gatwick. But or if we build a new airport in the Thames estuary, it wouldn't be to replace Gatwick, it'd be to replace Heathrow. The whole of Heathrow would have to be transferred over to the new airport, and that would then become the new hub airport for London. And by the way, Heathrow at one time used to be the largest hub airport in the world. It's now been overtaken by Abu Dhabi. People fly into Abu Dhabi to fly on to all sorts of different countries. Not many people actually fly from London to Abu Dhabi just to go there. I think roughly two-thirds of the people that fly into Abu Dhabi fly on somewhere else. So that's what was happening in Heathrow, and Heathrow was the largest. It's now the second largest hub airport in the world. But that's what London needs. If we don't have the facility in Heathrow, then people will start flying to Paris or they'll fly to Madrid, which has got the spare capacity in order to. So if you're flying from New York, you fly New York, Paris, and Paris, Copenhagen, rather than flying New York, Heathrow, and Heathrow, Copenhagen. That's what's going to happen unless Heathrow increases its capacity, or we solve the problem some other way, like we say, of building a new hub airport in the Thames estuary. So really, Gatwick is almost irrelevant to the London airport debate, I'm afraid.
Let's move back to Mr. Trump. And a man of courage. There's a law in America, H-1B, and it's there to control immigrants. They've got in from various means, apart from the border, the Mexican border. They've got in because they've got a job. Really? He's saying now lots of Americans are out of work because it's so much cheaper to pay cheap wages for the employers to those people coming from abroad. They're onto a good thing, they think. They're paid 3 and 4 times as much as they're in their own country, but often half as much as the average American Joe. So he said, yeah, you can come in if you've got the right qualifications, but you need another qualification. $100,000. Oh, that sorts them out, Sid.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Whether that's right or not, I honestly don't know. But that's obviously something that Trump has decided to put in place. But he's very much in favour of America first, and I'm going to do whatever I can to help the country and to make America prosper. And that's my aim. And obviously, that's one way he thinks that he's going to bring money into the United States. And by the way, his tariff policy is absolutely working, because he reckons that he's brought in already something like $350 billion through his tariff policy into the country. And the products that have been subject to tariffs have actually, by and large, fallen in price. So all the economists that predicted, oh, well, if you impose tariffs, that'll force prices up enormously, you'll then have a big problem with inflation. Well, as many people may know, the United States inflation is significantly lower than the UK inflation, and it hasn't affected inflation at all. So the tariff policy is absolutely working, and they've got to make money somehow. Of course, the other thing that Trump has done is to cut taxes, tried to cut spending, cut taxes. He's trying to do exactly what I've said that our country should be doing. Short term, it doesn't solve all the problems, but there's certainly signs that the deficit is beginning to come down in the United States, which is enormous, by the way. Biden increased it astronomically. The borrowing in the United States. Trump is trying to bring that down while creating wealth by bringing in lots and lots of new business. I mean, he's doing very well, is Trump, very well.
Back to UK, back to the lies of the UK. Two whoppers this last week. One of them, of course, is that it has emerged, thanks to the Greens and Labour. They're one and the same animal in many respects. There's 3 times as much oil and gas in the North Sea as they're telling us. And these are coming from the people that are drilling it, so they will know. Why the lies? Well, we know what they're hiding. They want to produce a net zero, which is impossible, agenda. But we want the truth, Sid.
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, if people haven't grasped it yet, the reality is it's quite interesting. I was listening to Trump's United Nations speech, which was frankly brilliant. And he literally laid on the line some of the things that I've been saying on this program. He said, "Oh, well, they used to call it global cooling." He said, "Global cooling." Then they changed their minds. It was no longer global cooling. Then it was global warming. And then they realized that global warming wasn't working, so they called it climate change. He said, it's none of it's correct. None of it's true. That's what Trump actually said last week at the United Nations. And of course, he's right. I mean, 1970 Earth Day, they predicted there's going to be an ice age by the year 2000. It was in 1988 that they switched from global cooling to global warming, and now this evidence is that the oceans are cooling. So if the oceans are cooling, all of a sudden we can't talk about global warming. We've got to talk about climate change. And if you can talk about climate change, anything that happens, it's quite interesting. I was listening to a program on the BBC, and they were talking about about growing some rice in the United Kingdom, and they must have mentioned climate change maybe 20 times in the report. Oh, due to climate change, we can now grow rice in the United Kingdom, and they were trying to grow it in Cambridge, by the way, which is hardly the south of the United Kingdom. So, but they're saying they're saying this amazing thing now. Now due to climate change, we can grow rice in the United Kingdom. It's the whole thing is a complete hoax, I'm afraid. That's the reality of it. And as you've said before, I think the hoax is probably being created to create the need for a one world government. But
Yeah.
the other thing which is people need to grasp is that carbon is actually good for the environment. Carbon is a natural part of the air. It's a natural part of life. And they pump greenhouses with carbon dioxide in order to make plants grow quicker. And all the signs are from space that if you look at the planet from space, then it's actually got significantly greener over the last few years. And we're now growing way more food than we were 50 years ago. I mean, the amount of food being grown in the whole of the earth is just way more. And of course, all these environmentalists were telling us that we had to cut the world population. I mean, some people even said we've got to cut it below 500 million or something, where the population now is about 8 billion of the earth, because the population was unsustainable. We just wouldn't be able to grow enough food or produce enough food for the population. So, we've got to reduce it because it's not sustainable. Well, actually, it's not true. We are able to produce plenty of food for what the world needs. And by the way, it's quite interesting that some left-wing governments, including our own, have resorted to attacking farmers and imposing additional tax on farmers and goodness knows what. I mean, they've certainly seen it in Holland. I mean, we've even had the Farmers' Party risen up there because of the way that the government was attacking farmers. And it's just nonsense. So they're trying to make their nonsense predictions come true. They're saying, we can't produce enough food, so they attack farmers to make it force a situation where we don't produce enough food. I mean, it's just the whole environmental agenda is complete and utter nonsense. There's nothing wrong with producing oil and gas. There's nothing wrong with a gas-fired boiler in your house. And there's nothing wrong with driving a car which has petrol to make it go. Nothing whatsoever.
There we are. That's a great relief to many people, but it's true. The other things that came out before we leave it finally, Trump's speech, Ukraine, he did the U-turn then because he's realised, Mr. Trump, that Mr. Putin cannot be appeased under any circumstances. And he's told basically that get some arms, we're going to do it in the hands of the Ukrainians, and let's lead them to reclaiming back their territory. Now that is a U-turn. There was a deal on the cards saying, oh, well, we'll give you a bit of that part of the country. No, no longer. The whole lot's going to come back, including Crimea, one hastens to add. So that's changed. Putin's brought that one on himself. The other thing he mentioned again, we've covered this was immigration, but he told the truth there. He said, EU and your leaders, you're going to hell by letting this immigration problem go on. I think that sums it up beautifully. Now, not many people would say that.
Okay, well, I won't go on to talk about immigration again, but I would like to talk about Ukraine. You see, it's quite interesting because I don't see it as a U-turn. I see it as part of the development of what Trump did. I think he was absolutely right to have a meeting with Putin and absolutely right to reach out to him and to try and get a negotiated settlement to the Ukraine problem. Before Trump came into the White House, the position for everybody in the world was we won't talk to Putin. That's other than countries like China and Ukraine, sorry, China and Iran, who were basically aligned with Russia, but most of the world was basically saying we're not going to talk to Putin. So taking that position, we just had a war carry on for about 3 years. And then Trump comes into the White House and says, I am going to talk to Putin and I'm going to do my level best to try and get this war solved and try and get a ceasefire and bring the sides together. And he meets with Putin and basically tries to get some sort of deal because that's what Trump likes doing, having a deal where Putin gets something for his war, but the fighting stops and it's all over and the country start living happily side by side again. The thing that happened though was that Trump expected that after his meeting with Putin at Alaska, there would be very soon there would be a meeting directly between Putin and Zelensky to hammer out some sort of peace agreement. Putin basically said no, he's not interested in meeting Zelensky unless Zelensky is willing to capitulate, just to leave office, and Putin could put his puppet in place, which is what he wanted in the first place. His plan when he first invaded Ukraine was that he would force Zelensky out of office, and he got his puppet lined up who was just going to move in, become president of Ukraine, and do whatever Putin told him to do. And he basically said, well, if you're willing to leave, if Zelensky's willing to leave office and allow me to put my puppet in place, then by all means we can meet and talk and we can solve the problem. But obviously Zelensky said no to that, and having said no to that, no meeting ever took place. And Putin has upped his efforts to drop bombs not only on the parts of Ukraine where they're fighting, but dropping bombs on Kiev and dropping bombs all over Ukraine. And Trump doesn't like it because obviously he's killing lots of people, and there's an awful lot of killing just carrying on. And Trump is angry with Putin. I mean, he said very clearly, Putin's let me down. I thought that we had a good relationship, and I thought with my relationship with Putin, I could get some sort of agreement, a peace agreement, and the war will be over. But he's not. So if he's not willing to cooperate with me, then I'll take him on. And he's now basically been going around the world telling any country that's buying oil from Russia, you stop or else. If you don't stop, I'm increasing the tariffs on you. and I'm going to cripple your country economically unless you stop buying oil from Russia. So he's trying to really punish Russia in that way. And he's now saying to Zelensky, "Yep, anything you want from me, I'll help you. We can work together because I now, since Putin's basically double-crossed me, refused to seek peace, I'm going to help you win the war." I don't think it's a U-turn. I think it's a natural result of Putin's response to Trump's peace efforts.
We move swiftly on to our footy spot, but before we go to the footy, we got to cover the Ryder Cup, which made very good television. The broadcasters are rejoicing in the aggro. That's a shame. I thought it was disgraceful.
Well, it's obvious if you watch it that tensions were rising high. And when they managed to hold a putt, it was just like they were doing a victory lap on both sides. And of course, the crowds were cheering America on like crazy. And if the Europeans missed a putt, there was a loud cheer for the missing a putt. I mean, obviously, tensions were very high, and it's normally the Ryder Cup is done in very good spirits. But I think this year, because the Europeans did so well, the Americans were embarrassed and got angry. And that's what really caused the problems. And
Well, illusions and delusions when one brings in your wife and family, and when you're addressing the ball, you don't start doing it then. And quite rightly, they were exited from the course, but it leaves a nasty taste. I mean, the Americans did very well, of course, coming back from an impossible position.
yeah, they did. I mean, in the singles, I mean, because overnight they were even talking about a record victory. Can Europe get to 20 points and have a record victory? Which, on the face of it, since they were winning 11 and a half, 4.5 overnight, that looked perfectly possible. But actually, it went the other way with the US coming back, which frankly I thought that they would. And if they could get some early victories on the board, then maybe, the momentum would start to swing their way. And in the end, it went right down to the wire with the last four matches. If the US had won the last four matches, they would have won the Ryder Cup. In the end, I think they won two of them and the other two were drawn. So, which was enough for Europe to hold, and they ended up with 15, well short of the 20 which they've been aiming for the record. But yeah, I mean, it's a great spectacle, fantastic spectacle, and it is a shame that it wasn't in the normal good temper of the Ryder Cup. But I think you'd rather, frankly, have passion in sport than have be watching sport that is just boring and no one's really interested in what's going on. I mean, the people who were watching that must be absolutely riveted it was riveting television, absolutely.
Right, footy, you're not going to get away with it. Crystal Palace, second in the Premiership. One has to say, wow, well done them.
Well, I love the way that Crystal Palace have been honouring God. I mean, really. I mean, Mark Gurhey, of course, but Jesus, I love Jesus. He put on his rainbow armband that he was forced to wear. And other players, have been kneeling down praying on the pitch. And you love seeing players honor God like that, frankly. And you love a team that honors God because there's been a lot of people in the Crystal Palace team that have been honoring God. So God bless them, frankly, really, God bless them. And Jesus says, "Those who honor me, I will honor." So I'd love Crystal Palace to do well. It was interesting in that game where they beat Liverpool. It looked as though Crystal Palace were ahead, of course, for most of the game. Then Liverpool equalised right near the end, and you thought, oh, it's going to be a draw. But then Crystal Palace got the winner right almost in the last kick of the game. Fantastic, great, great for the club. And I think, frankly, it's great for the Premier League because it's not good for the Premier League if you've got one team that runs away with it.
No.
It's bringing everything close together.
Yeah. So from God to the Red Devils, Manchester United. I've not read any pundit or column writer that's not reached the same conclusion about Mr. Ruben Amorim. What on earth is he doing there when you've got somebody that says, staring the hole in the side of a ship, no, don't put your finger in that hole, whatever you do, because it's not in my plan. I'm sorry, your plan does not work. What are you still doing there? With any other club, you'd have been out. So that leads us to answer another problem. What's the board letting him get away with it for? Perhaps half of them should be moved on.
Well, I think, frankly, the indications are they're now looking for another manager, and they probably want him to stay in place until they've got somebody ready to start. I think that the new manager may well be Gareth Southgate, and if it is, then
Oh, as a
well,
dyed in the red. Oh, we can't have him. I think I'd sooner have Amorim. Come on, he'll have everybody wearing rainbow shoelaces. Sit.
well, maybe, but he did very well for England.
He
He
won
was
nothing in his own career. He won
well.
nothing for England, but he did get a knighthood. So there you go. He can win a knight.
Well, anyway, we'll wait and see. But he's certainly, somebody at the moment who's unemployed, shall we say, who's got a pretty good record. So he could well be brought in, but who knows? Who knows? But I think I said last week that when I heard Amorim say, I hate my players sometimes, I think once you get to that, you say something like that publicly, then you've lost the dressing room. And once you lose the dressing room, they're not going to play for you anymore. And if your players aren't playing for you, if they're not playing together, if they're not playing for the team, then you can't continue. You're going to have to. You're going to have to go. And absolutely, he's got to go.
There you go. Another prediction. We'll wait the outcome. Sid, thank you so much. We'll see you next week.